I put up the thumbnail as the uh, chart I've been talking about now for, several lives. So that is an old chart about materiel and ammunition and such, and even some certain systems, equipment and such, that has been given to the proxy many, many months ago. This has been months ago. You have to pardon me. I literally just woke up and I seen all this, you know, insanity about some sort of air defense missile, an air defense missile, which is what an S-300 is, hitting Poland. Totally absurd. Over the top absurd. Now, there's no way in hell that Russia would launch an air defense missile at somebody to hit ground targets. What kind of, shit canning, just absurdity is that? Nonsense. Nonsense. More media narratives. Totally absurd. Now, an S-300 is an air defense missile. Most likely, it was done by the proxy. And here's why. Because we know we know what's coming. We know what's coming, and we know that, I've only been talking about it for a long time now. Well, not a long time, but several weeks. We know that Russia's about to invade Ukraine very soon, in a full-scale, massive invasion, sweeping down from the north. And they're trying, like I explained very diligently about the situation there in that city, that certain city. It starts with a K. I'm trying not to say too many of these words because anytime I do, my videos get shit canned, totally shit canned, and people don't see them because they don't get pushed out by the algos. So I'm trying to avoid saying certain words if I can, but that was to be a pinning action. And they're still having issues with that because I think they're not taking the bait. The proxies aren't taking the bait. They're moving in there very slowly, I'll just say. But I'm sure it's been set up to get them to fully commit. And like I said, if it's not going to work out there, it'll be somewhere else. Like I said in my other video, it'll be somewhere else in the east there. So, all in all, we know that Russia's preparing a full-scale invasion from the north, from Belarus and the Belgorod region of Russia, which is to the north of eastern Ukraine. So they're going to sweep down in a broad sweep, and they need a pinning action to pin down forces elsewhere, because the Pripyat marshes are not easy terrain to cross by heavy mechanized elements, mechanized infantry, armored forces, and such. Sorry, my nose is kind of stuffy. So here's the deal with that. The situation is that the proxy understands that there's a buildup going on. They have to know that to some extent. And I think this is like their Hail Mary pass Their FF event is a Hail Mary pass to try to get NATO involved. Okay? If you knew your military was depleted, it was depleted to such a horrible state to where you would be totally swept aside by a large scale invasion. These 300,000 troops that have been built up in the nations to the north, Russia and also the neighbor, Belarus. If you knew that there was a 300,000 man invasion force being built up, because keep in mind, when the United States invaded Iraq, just for the 3-week invasion phase, we went in there with 160,000 troops. So 300,000 plus the 63 to 65,000, going by average Russian battalion sizes, of course, as I always say, for the 70 combat battalions that are in the east, which would be the pinning force for while the large-scale operation takes place, to pin forces down in the east there, preferably for Russia, the southeast, that city that starts with a K. So they would like to pin down those forces so that they can cross the Pripyat marshes with their heavy assets, cross in there without anybody being able to effectively defend the causeways, and because the roads are atop causeways that have been built, well-engineered roads through the marshes, because there are road systems that run through there, but those could be defended because they're very narrow crossing points. They're very, very narrow crossing points and would be somewhat easy to defend. Think, for instance, in my audiobook, when they dug anti-tank ditches, they dug 2 sets of them, and when the tanks went through, they were bottlenecked through there because they had to be, because they couldn't proceed through the ditches. It's the same concept with the marsh. You can't drive armor through a marsh. You have to take the roads. So those would be easy to defend if you had the ability to do so. But if you're concentrating all your forces elsewhere, then you really don't have that ability. So that notwithstanding, when you know your enemy, I'm talking about from the perspective of the regime in Kiev, when you know that your enemy is building up to invade you, then you're going to be pulling all kinds of stunts, right? I mean, it stands to reason that you would be pulling all kinds of stunts. Now, I've heard everything from they're also trying stalling tactics. Stalling tactics, as in claiming now that they're willing to negotiate because they've gotten their asses kicked badly. Hey, Wild Animus and Kathy and Boxer Mom, howdy. Welcome. So they're trying stalling tactics, like claiming that they want to negotiate. And, remember, at the beginning, they said they would never negotiate. Now, I'm talking about the West and their proxy, said that they would never negotiate. Hey, yeah, excellent. I like your name there. Quit it with the lies. That is an excellent name, because I feel the same way right now about all these bunk BS narratives that are coming out of the mainstream media. I've had enough of it. It's like every time, it's every day. It's like I keep seeing all these current event stories, and they're all totally outrageous, over the top, absurd. So here's the thing. So here they're claiming now that they want to negotiate because they know what time it is. That is a stalling tactic. They know that the Russians are building up these massive forces to their north. to conduct a broad sweep. Now, that video I put up from Roy Potter, he says it all. He says, yeah, Russia's going to kick NATO's ass. And he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. So, Zelensky, I have to say his name. I have to say his name because he is the one that's running the proxy. Like I said, I'm trying not to say too many names, but this will probably get shadow banned. It probably already is, so I guess it doesn't even matter at this point. I wanted this to be kicked out, by the algos, but of course they're going to ban this. This is something people need to hear, too, because people don't think about these types of things. They're really not thinking about these things whenever they see these narratives. So, here's the deal. He is the one that pulled the FF against Poland. Because, think about it. He used air defense missiles. Air defense missiles. Russia would not be firing air defense missiles at Poland. Why would Ukraine do it? Because they don't have any more missiles left. They probably used up all their Tochka-U's and all their other missiles, so they probably had to rely on air defense missiles that have been gifted to them by Eastern European nations. This has all the hallmarks of an FF event, of a false flaggeroonie with cheese. This has all the hallmarks of something like that. Because Russia uses caliber cruise missiles and a whole slew of other types of missiles. They've got a whole bunch of other different types of missiles. Different categories, different types. I mean, look, they've got anti-ship missiles, because the anti-ship missiles can obviously be used against ground targets. I mean, that's happened before. So they've got anti-ship missiles. They've got a bunch of cruise missiles. The Caliber is their workhorse. The Caliber is the workhorse of their cruise missiles. But they have other types of cruise missiles as well. They also have air-fired cruise missiles that can be fired from strategic heavy bombers. Standoff cruise missiles. They have those too. So why would they fire air defense missiles at ground targets? That makes absolutely no sense. An S-300 is an air defense missile. That's what's being reported. So I guess that's the new narrative. I guess they think people aren't going to be thinking about these types of things like, why did they fire an air defense missile when they have all these other types of missiles they could be using against ground targets? I mean, why an air defense missile? It makes no sense. So that's obviously, it's blatantly obviously an FF. People aren't thinking about that. And, I thought that they might pull an FF. Like somebody unhinged enough in the West. I thought somebody in the West who was unhinged enough, or maybe Zelensky himself, because he's a cokehead and he's a total nut job. I thought he might have had somebody pull one of those dirty B's, a dirty B type of thing. But like I said, also, if someone were to ever pull something like that, you would see the West run away and disengage like you've never seen anybody run in your life, because they wouldn't want to suffer the consequences of something like that. Because prophetically, really, I mean, there's a lot that has to happen, and it just seems all too soon for something like that. So I think it's too late. I think it's too late. It doesn't matter what they do. There's no proverbial Hail Mary pass. There's just no way that there's anything that can be done to stop what's coming. Like I said, it's going to be like a tidal wave when it hits. I'm talking about this 300,000 man invasion force. It's going to be like a tidal wave when it hits. Now, yes, you know, I'll give credit where it's due. That proxy nation has a lot of defensible territory. I mean, really think about it. I mean, they do. So, in the western parts of that country, they have the Carpathian Mountains in the southwest, from the very bottom, bottom southwest corner, about midway up, if you're going up the westernmost borders. Then, in the north, they've got the Pripyat Marshes. Very defensible territory if you're worried about an invasion from the north. Talking about predominantly in the northwest, not so much the northeast. But here's the thing. In the northeast, yes, invaders can strike through the northeast, but then you have the Dnieper River, which has these humongous reservoirs. I mean, the reservoirs are pretty wide for a river. I mean, they're very wide. These reservoirs are huge. That is a very wide river. Very wide. So, all in all, they have pretty defensible territory as a country, but it's not going to be enough because they've been ground down for the past 7 months by a limited incursion, not even a full-scale invasion. See, the forces that the Russians actually sent in there locally, and I mean locally as in within the borders of the proxy country, they were outnumbered by those forces, by the proxy forces. But here's the thing, it was a limited incursion. So they went in there with their 70 combat battalions, their 63 to 65,000 troops, on average. So they went in there with that, and they were fighting forces with that who outnumbered them by 10 to 1 because they were fighting over 600,000 men total. And that's the reserves, the active, and the paramilitary forces of that proxy nation. They were outnumbered locally within the borders of that country by a factor of 10 to 1. So for the past 7 months, they've ground them down. They've ground them down to where, again, they're on their like 8th round of mobilizations, maybe, 7th or 8th. And they have already, since towards the end of the summertime, been recruiting old men. Not like really old men, but we're talking like 40s, 50s, maybe, early 60s. I mean, because they're running out of manpower. They're starting to recruit youngsters. There's youngsters breaking their bones to get out of, going to the front there. It's crazy. Talking like, 16, 17-year-old boys breaking their bones so that they don't have to go to the front. And I'm talking about for the proxy country, for the Western proxy country. Now, they're talking about maybe recruiting women there too. It's absurd. Everybody else got the hell out of Dodge. You've seen a total brain drain to where it's affected their economy to where we, the USA, are propping it up by all the aid money we send. We're literally paying the salaries of the proxy forces army, while our army is told to go on food stamps and welfare because their checks, evidently now, their paychecks aren't enough. They're not enough. So we tell our army to go on food stamps and other welfare programs. Yeah. While we pay the salary of a foreign military we have no business supporting. Yeah, we're paying the salary. You're right, Wild Animus. Hey, Kathy. And Bang Bang. Great to see you all. Yeah, I mean, it's totally absurd. So we're paying the salary and propping up the economy of a foreign nation. While ours is falling apart at the seams. It's ripping apart at the seams. It's falling apart. It's collapsing. We're in a state of decay and collapse. And we're supporting foreign countries instead of our own. So, that being said, if we did disengage suddenly and stop supporting them, they would fall apart virtually overnight. Virtually overnight. Because so many of their people, literally millions of their people, have already fled that country as refugees. Refugees. They went to Western Europe, and some came to the North, well, not just the United States, but Canada. So I would say North America. The rest came to North America as refugees. You had a total brain drain because all the people with means and money, people that had the means, they had the money, got the hell out of Dodge. Probably to avoid being recruited to fight in a proxy conflict. Because you have to understand, Ukraine, it has it had a little over 40 million people. But now that so many people fled as refugees, you've seen a total brain drain take place, where all the best and brightest have already gotten out of Dodge. All the people that had the means and they had the money and they had the connections, they got out of Dodge. So what's left is basically the dregs, like the dregs of the recruitment pool, meaning like the worst possible types of people you could recruit for military affairs, military operations. We're talking like old people, the geriatric brigades, the geriatric brigades. We're talking old people, and we're talking, the younger generations. Because all of your 20-somethings, they're either still there at the front, they've either been captured or they've been killed. Captured, killed, or whatever remains of them is still at the front. So now, to augment the numbers of killed and captured or wounded, who have been wounded that can't fight anymore, to augment those numbers, replenish, they've had to recruit elderly people, like upper middle-aged people, the geriatric brigades, 40s, 50s, early 60s, and they've had to recruit youngsters, teenage boys. And now they're talking about recruiting women over in the proxy. So they're very desperate. They're very desperate. So they're pulling stalling actions and false flags. So what they're doing is they're very desperate. They're grasping at straws, and they're trying everything they can try to somehow get the West involved. They're trying to get the West involved. So they fired air defense missiles, apparently. And you know what? For all intents and purposes, because it's the mainstream media, this could all just be made up. Who knows? This could have even been something like, even if it wasn't a false flag, this could have been something like, just like a freak occurrence or something, or an accident. I mean, who knows? But then they found a way to spin it to make it look a certain way as an excuse to get involved. Who even knows? Who knows at this point? The MSM lies about so much, but the way it's being portrayed seems like it was a false flag, okay? I'm just going to say it. It just seems like it was a false flag, the way it's portrayed. So, if that's what really happened, then that's exactly what it is. It's a false flag. And it was done by the proxy against Poland to get them involved, to get the West involved. But, like I've always said, and others have said, Roy Potter's one. The Duran Channel's another. Gonzalo Lear's another. There's a bunch of people that know what time it is. We know what the score is. If NATO, if the West tries to get into a conflict with Russia, NATO is going to get annihilated. It's going to get destroyed. It's going to get destroyed. It's going to get destroyed. They're vastly outnumbered, even just by Russia. In terms of materiel, their equipment, their munitions, everything else, and their personnel numbers, Russia outnumbers NATO drastically, especially when it comes to NATO forces in Europe, because NATO, look at the European NATO contributors. I can't even recall how many times I got up there in my live streams, and read their equipment numbers and their personnel numbers of the 4 biggest European NATO contributors versus just Russia. Not even China, who's even bigger than Russia, just against Russia. I've compared Russia and the 4 biggest NATO European member states. So we, too, do not have very many forces within Europe. We really don't. I'm talking about us, America. We do not have that many forces within Europe. I'm talking ground forces. I mean, the whole nine. We don't, ground, air, everything. We do not have that many forces in Europe. It would be a speed bump, or maybe not even a speed bump. Russia would just run right over it. And by speed bump, I mean Russia would still run over it, but maybe they would hold them for like a day or two. I have no idea, but I don't think that they'd be held off very long. If they tried to hold Russia back, they wouldn't be able to do it for very long before getting finally run over. But they might not even be a speed bump, because all in all, we're talking just, several tens of thousands of American ground forces. And NATO as a whole, we're talking the European woke militaries combined with our woke military forces that are in Europe together. So the Western European NATO contributing nations would have a hell of a time calling up all their reserves in a situation whereby, Russia's on a rampage because they've had enough, and they just said, to hell with it. Let's go all the way to the English Channel. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the Western European NATO contributors would have a hell of a time trying to call up reserves. It would be a mess. It would be a disaster. In my live stream I made called Failed State, I read some interesting statistics having to do with the current state of decay of several of the European member states, especially Germany, who is by far the worst because they don't pay to maintain their armed forces. They neglect them. They've neglected them horribly. In the past, 10 or so years, they have horribly neglected their armed forces, the Bundeswehr. They've horribly neglected the Bundeswehr. So Britain and France are not much better, nor is Italy. They're not much better. They are not much better. And they do not have the ammunition. They don't have the artillery, howitzer shells. They don't have the ammunition. They don't have enough to fight even a defensive war, much less any type of offensive war. Understand what I'm saying. I'm saying that the European NATO contributors do not have available ammunition to defend themselves. And they damn sure don't have enough to launch any sort of aggressive operations. They don't. Do you know why? Because, like I've read many times to you, the artillery howitzer shells in Britain and France, out of the four biggest European NATO contributors, Britain and France are in better shape than Germany and Italy, but even so, they're still lacking. They're still horribly lacking. Those countries run out of artillery shells in 8 days. 8 days. A week and a day is all it takes for Britain and France to run out of artillery howitzer shells for their artillery. And the amount of artillery that all four of them have combined is abysmal. It is abysmal. It's horrible compared to what Russia has. It's not even, it's like, oh man, it's such a, there is such a wide gulf, a wide gap, a wide gulf between the equipment that Russia has and the equipment that Britain, France, Germany, and Italy have, especially in artillery and tanks. Artillery and tanks, the West is horribly lacking. They're horribly lacking. And also the ammunition for it all. So that being said, NATO, for them to try and get involved, it would be like a death wish. It would be a death wish because Russia will kick their ass horribly. And ours, too, if we get involved. See, if we get involved, it'll drag us into a conflict that we cannot win because it would trigger the invasion of the United States because the Trojan horse shock armies that are inside our country and also are ringing our country, Canada, Mexico, Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, Bahamas, because China has port facilities in Bahamas, and other places. Look, they are ringing this country. And they're inside of it because China's the biggest landowner in the United States. They've based all their Trojan horse shock forces on CCP regime-owned properties. If we get into any kind of scuffle with either Russia or China, that'll be the end of us. That'll be the end of us. Because that'll trigger... It'll trigger Jeremiah 50 and 51. But that's not going to happen because we haven't had our internal conflict yet. That still has to happen prophetically. We also have to collapse even before that, like a total economic, financial, food, fuel collapse. We have to have a famine. We have to be in the midst of a civil conflict right before we get invaded by China and also Russia and their other allies too. So to get in a fight with Russia would definitely cause all of that. So I don't see that happening because I see that NATO, they have to know that they're outgunned by Russia. They have to know they're outgunned by Russia. They stand no chance. Every NATO facility in Europe is well within striking distance of Russian aircraft, missiles, battleships, subs, everything. Strategic heavy bombers, I mean, everything. There's nowhere safe in Europe for NATO forces to build up or to, position assets. If they moved ammunition dumps around, or move, like what I'm saying is if the European NATO members moved forward all their ammunition dumps, and remember, they don't have enough for a defensive war, much less any sort of sustained offensive type of scenario. If they move their assets forward, those would get annihilated. They would get annihilated by Russia. They would destroy their ammunition dumps. There'd be nothing to fight with. Logistically, the situation is horrible for NATO. Russia hasn't even begun to really expend all the stocks of shells, rockets, tank shells, airdropped munitions, cruise missiles. They haven't even begun to expend the massive stocks of those weapons they have. And I'm not pro-Russia just because I'm up here telling the freaking truth about it. Because I know what I know about this situation. I know what Russia has. And I know what we have. And we don't have anything compared to what they have. We have gutted and depleted ourselves with this whole stupid situation. This situation is mentally... Well, you know what I'm saying. I was about to say the R word, but I don't want this to get pulled down because evidently that's a banned word now, which is bullshit. But look, people need to hear these types of videos because people don't understand what's going on. They don't know what's going on. They don't know how bad things really are for us in the West. Listen, instead of building ourselves up, we ripped ourselves down and gutted ourselves. We ripped down our own military industrial complex. Well, now we're giving away all the stocks, like in my thumbnail. My thumbnail is a chart from many months ago, before we've even continued giving them even more stuff. That was from many months ago. You'll notice there's a line for 155 shells. 500-something thousand. This was many months ago, before we gave them 2 million. And that was both 155. To be fair, that's 155 and 105. The lighter howitzers, the 105, but also 155. Combined are 2 million shells that we've given them now. 2 million. 2 million. That's immense. That's like two-thirds of the artillery we have. Two-thirds. Plus the HIMARS / M270 MLRS system rockets, the rocket artillery rocket ammunition that we've given them, is over a third. It's about a half. We've given them about half of all our HIMARS rockets by this point. Insane. Well, the M270 is also in that category, HIMARS / M270. The only difference between the HIMARS and the M270 is the M270 is a tracked vehicle that can carry twice the amount of rocket pods that the HIMARS can. The HIMARS means it's a high mobility rocket system, artillery rocket system. So the HIMARS is on a truck and carries about half the rockets that the M270 does. But here's the thing. They both use the same ammo. So we've given them half of our rocket artillery ammo, and it would take years to replace this shit. People don't understand that. This shit would take years for us to replace. All the anti-tank systems we've given them, the javelins, all these tow systems, a whole plethora of different things that we've given them. We're depleting our own stocks for a foreign country, a foreign nation that we're propping up. We have no business messing with. We have no business over there. We're breaking our own backs against in a proxy conflict against a nation that can destroy us, against a country that can destroy us. Not only can Russia destroy us, but there's an even more powerful nation than Russia called China. It's called China. China has the biggest tank fleet on the face of the earth, the biggest armored fighting vehicle, and infantry fighting vehicle, armored fighting vehicle, and armor personnel carrier fleet on the face of the earth. When you combine all three of those, they have the biggest tank fleet. I'm talking everything, storage numbers and active numbers, because the storage numbers goes to all their paramilitary and reserve forces. China has the most artillery on the face of the earth, but so does Russia. They're both basically tied. For all intents and purposes, they're tied in the number of artillery pieces. But they both have incredible air defense networks. China actually has more air defense systems than Russia, but Russia and China still, they both have very highly effective air defense networks. The best in the world. The best in the world. So China has an enormous combat air fleet with more combat planes than any other nation. More combat planes. And they're all very effective. Fourth generation aircraft, 4.5 generation aircraft, and fifth generation aircraft. That's their whole Air Force. It's very modernized, very highly technologically advanced. Their electronic warfare capabilities are immense. Like, so are Russia's, but China's are immense as well. They will annihilate us. Russia has held back a lot of their best systems. Why do you think that is? Because they held them back in case they had to fight the West directly. And they did this tiny, small, limited incursion, when they only sent in 70 combat battalions. They've only used like 5% of their whole military, if that, 5%. They have 3.5 million forces in the Russian armed forces and paramilitary. 2 million are their reserves. That's their reserves. 2 million. 1.2 million is their active duty military, which is all their branches of their military, active duty. Then you have the 300,000 paramilitary forces, which is what they call now the National Guard. It used to be called the internal troops, but that's their paramilitary forces. It's a small paramilitary force when you look at China's of 20 million, but 300,000, it adds to their combat power. It adds to Russia's combat power. So they have 3.5 million total personnel. Russia has the second biggest tank fleet, second biggest armored fighting vehicle, infantry fighting vehicle, armor personnel carrier category. They have the second biggest after China, second biggest tank fleet also. They have, they're tied in artillery with China. They're both kind of close in air defense, but China's a little bigger in air defense. But Russia has immense forces, nowhere near the size of China's, but they're big nonetheless. For Europe, by European standards, they're enormous for Europe. And they will annihilate NATO. And keep in mind, China, who's even more big and bad than Russia, has already sent forces to Serbia. It's on record. There's no denying it. It's on record. They have sent immense numbers of forces to Serbia. Also, it's also on record that they moved armored forces into Belarus. Chinese armored forces have been moved into Belarus. Plus, Belarus, their whole army is at the disposal of Russia, their whole military. Same with Serbia. I mean, there's immense quantities of forces who are ready for war while the West is playing with its thumb up its ass. The West has its thumb up its ass, letting itself fall apart and deplete itself, break itself through a proxy conflict and years of neglect. They've neglected their forces for years. And then they've given away vital equipment and munitions that they need themselves to the proxy. For a Hail Mary pass, such as to give away or I'm sorry, not giveaway, I'm sorry, for a Hail Mary pass, such as to fire air defense missiles, because that's what an S-300 is. It's an air defense missile. It's not made to fight ground targets. I mean, I suppose you can switch out the guidance systems and make it do that, but it's not made for that. It's made to shoot down aircraft. It's an air defense weapon. So for air defense missiles to be fired at Poland is a Hail Mary pass. It's a Hail Mary pass, a desperate one, to get the West involved to save their bacon from the fire, because Russia's about to come in there like a tidal wave, and they know it. They have to know it. They have to know it, or at least have an idea about it. And they're trying to get the West involved to save their ass before Russia pulls off their full-scale invasion. In addition to this 7-month-long limited incursion they've already been doing. Hey, Aaron. Good to see you. Bang Bang and Klaus and BD and Mary and Kathy, everybody. Great to see all y'all. So, yeah, so they're doing all this desperate garbage. And they think it's going to save them from what's about to hit them. So they're pulling false flags. They're claiming they want to negotiate. See, they took a hard line against negotiation for 7 months as they kept throwing away lives of their forces. Human wave assault after human wave assault against the Russians, losing all these lives, claiming they weren't going to negotiate until Putin was gone and they got all their territory back. Now they claim they want to negotiate. Well, somebody is telling them to do that as a stalling tactic because it's getting pretty desperate for them. It's getting pretty damn desperate for them. And they're also pulling FF events. FF events. They're trying everything. They're trying everything they can to buy more time. To buy more time. But it's too late. It's too late. Because you don't build up 300,000 troops to invade a country that size. And that is enough for a country that big. You don't build up 300,000 troops to invade a country like that unless you're going to use them. Unless you're going to use them. Russia has every intention of invading that country. Every intention. Even if they claim that they're willing to listen to what they have to say, like, you know, I'm talking about listen to their enemy, listen to what they have to say about negotiations. Secretly in the back of their mind, they're still like, yeah, we know they're full of shit. We're still going to invade you, you know, but they're not going to say that. You know, they might pretend like they're interested in hearing what has to be said, but you don't go ahead and build up all those forces not to use them. Not to use them. So that's what's happening. That's what's happening. Beware of all these MSM media narratives and media spin, because it's a time of war, and Smith-Mundt, everybody forgets about that. Look, it's a time of war, and propaganda is over the top. It's over the top. They're trying to play on people's emotions, whip people into a frenzy, get people to support another foreign misadventure. Like all the other ones we've been involved in weren't failures. So now we got to go fail some more. Come on, everybody. Come on now. Come on. I got injured badly in one of the foreign misadventures. So a lot of good men died. A lot of very good men died in that as well. very good men died over there. For what? For what? For what? That's one of the questions I ask myself a lot. What the hell was all of that shit even for? What was it for? You know, what good came out of that? Because a lot of good people died over there. That's what I dealt with. Plus, I got injured. You know, it's. Look, what was all that for? A lot of questions. How many times is it going to take for the American people to understand that we need to focus in on ourselves and build ourselves up? I'm not talking about this evil, godless, satanic regime. I'm talking about just the ordinary, run-of-the-mill American people. When are they ever going to figure out that to support a system, supporting a system that endorses these activities never ends up well for them? When are they going to figure that out? I don't think they ever will. I don't think they ever will. Because they're too easily manipulated by BS propaganda. You know, but the American ordinary run-of-the-mill people should be focused on themselves, bettering themselves, getting closer to God Almighty. They should be focused on themselves with Yeshua Messiah and the Holy Spirit. You know, they should be focused on themselves with enhancing their personal relationship with Yeshua Messiah. That's what they should be doing. And until they figure that out, all there will ever be is failure after failure. Eventually collapse, a multi-way civil conflict like Syria, with multiple factions and sects, sectarianism. It'll be a multi-way conflict, civil conflict, because America is vast. It is enormous. The population is the third biggest in the world. It's naive to think that a situation like Syria wouldn't also happen here. It's very naive to think that. There's so many people with so many different belief systems in so many places. It's naive to think that there's not going to be enormous amounts of people fighting over very limited, very scarce resources and not having a whole myriad of different beliefs, a whole plethora of different beliefs. It's very naive to think that that's not going to be the case. It's not going to be no two-way thing. No, it's going to be a multi-way thing when it happens. Jeremiah 50:51. Before we even get invaded by these enormous foreign armies it speaks of, it says various leaders, it says conflict or violence will erupt between various leaders. Leaders plural. Many leaders. Sounds like faction leaders. Leaders of different factions. Factions. Like in my Second American Syrian style civil conflict documentary, the 5 live stream long documentary series. I had to do it in a live stream format so it would all be done quickly and fit. It would even fit. It's a lot of information packed into one 5 video long playlist. So that's a hypothetical. This shows exactly all the characteristics of what something like that would look like. Exactly. All the belief systems, the way the economy would look and how it would work in the different factional areas that they controlled. Why the regime would be like Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria at the very beginning. Why they would lose a lot of land quickly, very quickly, because they're weak. They have a woke military that's very small. They couldn't hold everything down. They could only hold down their woke loyalist areas. That's all they could do. Realistically, that's all they can do. They don't have the logistics necessary to be able to conduct operations everywhere ubiquitously. They're just not that big. They don't have the logistics. They don't have the equipment to be able to operate everywhere ubiquitously. They just can't do that. They can't be everywhere. It just can't be. I've shown you the math. Very simple math. You break the forces they have, 2.2 million, down to 1 man per square mile. They'd still be outnumbered in each and every square mile. You'd have like hundreds, maybe even thousands in some cases, outnumbering one guy who's probably a woke tard anyway, a weakling. But anyway, that besides the point. You break them down, put 1 man per square mile across the map of the United States. You wouldn't even quite fill up. I mean, you'd get close, but you wouldn't even quite fill up half of the map, half of it. So all of that extra territory that wouldn't have a man on every square mile would be totally unoccupied by anybody. Think about that. Really think about that. They do not have the people, and they're also broken up and spread around the world too. So not even everybody's at home. So all they would have enough to do is occupy their woke loyalist areas. That's all they could do. That's all they could do. And everything else would be a free-for-all. It would be a free-for-all. It would be all of these different factions jockeying for control, vying for power, jockeying for control over different areas of the country. It would be a free-for-all. It would be anything goes, because different factions would take control of different areas, just like what we saw in Syria for a long time during the Syrian conflict. It would be a total free-for-all. The only reason Bashar al-Assad even held on to power is because Bashar al-Assad had very strong allies, foreign allies, who came in and saved his ass from being overthrown. Because those factions were on the verge of overthrowing his ass. They were about to take him down. He was losing control. He was losing his civil war. So he had to call upon Russia, Iran, proxies, and eventually later, even China came and added advisors and logistics to support the Assad regime. But at first it was Russia, Iran, proxies, and they came in and they saved Assad's ass. They saved him from the fire because he was about to get overthrown. You know, in theory, Assad's armed forces should have been enough. They should have been enough. As big as they were, they should have been enough to hold down a land and population that's really like, you know, I mean, it's 2/3 the size of California. But they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. They couldn't stop it. They couldn't stop the factions. The factions took control quick. And it all started with massive civil unrest around their country, around Syria. It started with massive civil unrest around Syria, and the civil unrest acted as a curtain from which these factions appeared out of, from behind of, like in my internal conflict documentary. The first one part of that story is the origin story. It's read like a story format. The second video, half of it is the rest of the story, and then it starts the battle maps where there's visuals and such. And then the last, the last 3 videos after that one, after the second one, is all visual stuff. It's battle maps and stuff. Of course, I have to, at times I had to make the screen dark so that I could read things, but it has intervals between all these different battle maps and explanations of the economy, the leaders, the foreign involvement with China and Russia supplying arms to the different factions just to weaken us further. And they weren't complicated weapons. They were very simple weapons that they supplied, things that they have like, tens of millions of that it wouldn't even scratch the surface to give away like, like a few 100,000 of, like rocket propelled grenades and things like that, hand grenades, very basic weapons, and some of their rocket artillery systems that are, more primitive, that, that aren't like guided or anything, just stuff like that. They gave it away, I mean, they didn't give it away, but they sold it at a very, very low cost, to where that they could use those arms to further destabilize the situation during the internal conflict. There's a lot of stuff in those docu videos. They're very informative about exactly all the different things that would feed into a situation like that. It's a hypothetical, but it shows you so many angles. Even the leaders are people. All the leaders are as realistic as it gets. These could be real people. These could be real people. They all had real jobs. They all had real, real attributes of people. People that existed both in the past and nowadays. So these could have been real people, but they were hypothetical. These are characters I created, but they could all be real people. Think about it. This country's enormous. You don't know what people are doing in the background. People could be renting out hotel boardrooms and having meetings, secret meetings, just like I conveyed in that hypothetical. They could be doing anything. They could be meeting in compounds, clubhouses, hotel boardrooms, wherever. People could have pirate radio stations that broadcast their own group's propaganda. It's very easy for people to do stuff like that. People just don't understand it because most people don't look any deeper than surface level type of shit. So there's a lot that people have to consider. There's a lot of things people have to consider. Oh, thank you, Lady M. All right, Aaron, take care. Hey, Brogan, good to see you. Well, everybody, I've been gone for an hour or so, but I'm going to go a little longer. I'll give you all another, 15 minutes? Because now I'm going to focus on the internal stuff. And maybe I might talk about China. I don't know. But the internal stuff, that's very real. We're getting to a point where there are going to be different factions that emerge. It'll be exactly like Syria. So as all this different BS nonsense in Europe or wherever else is going on, this is nothing more than a dying empire in its death throes, its final death throes. That's all this is. Because America has been hollowed out and depleted. We are not even a shell of what we once were. We're not even a shadow of what we once were. All the industry, largely, not like literally every last bit of it, but what I'm saying is all the industry we once had is now gone. They're very, very small levels of industry remaining. I mean heavy industry, like where you're manufacturing military equipment or construction equipment or other such things, steel mills, all that type of stuff. All the heavy industries we used to have are largely gone. Largely. We have very little heavy industry remaining. We have, sure, we've got final assembly plants that assemble cars and things like that, but there's not a lot of full production where you produce an entire product here. We might assemble products in final assembly plants and things like that, but we don't produce a lot of products anymore that go through the whole production process, from raw material to the creation of components to assembling components. We don't have the whole full scale processes of industry like we once did. Like I said, I'm not saying every last teeny shred of it is gone, but I'm saying that for the most part, we don't have that anymore like we once did. Largely, this is a financially based economy. It's based on fiat currency. It's based on worthless paper. We're propped up by the dying breaths of this petrodollar, which is about to be gone. It's about gone. China's about to do their petro yuan. They're doing their final deals with the Saudis to establish the petro yuan renminbi. And China will now reap all the same benefits that we used to reap from the petrodollar, but they'll get it from the petro yuan. Because China already has its tentacles in Iran. So does Russia, too. Russia and Iran are very close, but China is also very close with Iran, just like they are with Russia, just like they are with Pakistan, North Korea. I mean, India could be brought into the fold, too, pretty soon. India's already allies with Russia, but what I'm saying is China might put aside all their differences with India and just make completely good with them. And it seems to be that's what's happening. But Saudi too might have to put aside their differences with Iran and make nice with the Iranians. So they can have this gigantic Eurasian bloc where OPEC is totally given over to the Chinese and Russians, to their control. So China will have their petro yuan renminbi at full capacity here pretty soon. Because China's already in Iran, and Iran is a big oil producing nation. They have a lot of natural gas too, but Iran is a big oil nation. Not as they don't have the output that Saudi has, but nonetheless, they're still a big oil producing nation. So take everything into consideration. The Eurasian Eastern Bloc, the East is the future. The West is going. You know, the West is fading into the memory banks. I mean, they're fading into the distance. The East, however, the Eastern Eurasian Bloc is rising with China at the lead and Russia. But Russia, I see them as like a junior partner. Not to denigrate them, but China's enormously bigger than Russia, just by a massive scale. But you know, I'm saying economically, financially, I mean, China's immense. They're huge. Their military, their conventional military is vastly larger than Russia's. You know, Russia has a decent amount of artillery. They have the second biggest like tank fleet and armored vehicle. I know that, but I'm saying China's is the biggest. They have the most tanks, most armored vehicles, most air defense. They're tied in artillery with Russia. China's enormous. And they have the most combat aircraft. They have the biggest navy and highly technologically advanced. China's enormous. Their technological base is enormous. It's huge. We could never beat China. We cannot beat Russia either. We can't beat Russia either. But we could never beat China. Never. That'd be a dream. That'd be a dream at this point. But like a pipe dream. But this is what's going on. Being that China and Russia are very austere countries, they're waiting for us to wipe ourselves out because they don't want to have to waste lives and equipment and money if they know they don't have to. So they would prefer, yeah, sure, I mean, they could kick our ass directly right now. They could kick our ass directly, but they would prefer it if we collapsed first and broke down into our Syrian-style civil conflict. And the reason is because you don't ever want to occupy a country that you have to fight a humongous counterinsurgency campaign against. You know, against partisan uprisings and things like that. You do not want to have to ever fight a large-scale counterinsurgency conflict because it will drain things. It will drain lives and resources over time. Over time, it will. I mean, look at what Vietnam was like, and that was a small country. Look what Afghan was like. Look what Iraq was like. I mean, it just drains all this money and resources and lives. It's a waste. So, if you can help it, you don't want to have to do that. So, what better if you're very frugal and austere? and cheap, I guess. I mean, if you're cheap and austere and frugal-minded, what better than to let all the best and most experienced people in the country you want to invade, well, what better than to let them starve and fight over limited resources and kill each other off so that you don't have to. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to expend a whole ton of money and some lives and whatever equipment might be lost. You don't want to have to expend a whole bunch of resources to have to hold down and occupy a country that you've taken over and you wish to colonize. Remember, China says that they want to colonize this country. If you're having to deal with a whole bunch of uprisings, your ability to effectively colonize a place, that throws a wrench into that. And China wants to exploit this place as quickly as possible, as fast as possible. So they would prefer it if we did that job for them so that they don't have that issue when they colonize this place. They don't want to have to, put down a whole bunch of uprisings because it throws a wrench into their economic plans to drain this place, to drain the lifeblood out of it. It throws a wrench in those plans. So what better than to let your enemy have a total collapse, have infighting amongst themselves, let whatever best, experienced people, let them slaughter each other so that when you invade, you don't have to worry about those people organizing into partisans to fight against you. Guerrillas, partisans, insurgents, it's all the same thing. You don't have to worry about them organizing into such groups to where it throws a wrench into your plans to strip mine and colonize your former enemy that's now been vanquished. Because they can vanquish us militarily and take over, obviously. I mean, that would be quick. It would be quick and easy. But the part that would be an issue is what I'm saying is once they've taken over, then all the people that would resist, all these uprisings, it would make their plans to colonize this place in a safe manner, in a secure manner, it would make those plans exceedingly difficult. Because you're not going to move in a bunch of economic assets like your civilians and your workforce and colonists. You can't move in a bunch of civilian labor while you have a war going on. It would make their ability to take full advantage of the conquered land. It would make that ability exceedingly hard, exceedingly difficult. So that is why they're frugal-minded and cheap and austere. They want us to do the dirty work for them. They want us to destroy ourselves. Well, we've been on a self-destructive path for a very long time as a land, as a people. As a land and a people, we have been on a very self-destructive path for a while. So, I said all that to say this. Think about your preps, your preparations, your physical and spiritual preparations. Think about that. Take some time to really sit down and think hard about that. Think about how you budget your time. What are you investing your time into? Are you watching news stories that aren't going to help you in the future? Knowing current events is not going to help you in the future. It really isn't. And what I mean by that is that watching mainstream media sourced information that comes from the mainstream media is not going to help you in your future. You need to be learning what types of real things you're going to face in your future. So one thing you can do to do that is you can read your Bible, but you can also look at things like these hypothetical scenarios that I've taken all this effort and time. I've invested a lot of time and effort into those. Look at how those play out. Really pay attention to those. Really pay attention to every detail. I know some people are probably bored with it. Some people aren't interested in that type of stuff. Some people just don't find the whole strategy, military doctrine, tactics, strategy, equipment, and how it's all used and all of that stuff. Some people just don't find that interesting. I understand that, but that is going to help you to become a more effective emergency planner. Because if you notice, if you pay really close attention to all of that work, all the best work that's been created on this channel is in my playlists. But I also have those community tab stories further back in my community tab. Those are good too. But the playlists have all my best work. 96-hour invasion, Pacific Northwest, new documentary, Pacific Northwest, and the community tab story review. For the community tab stories, I made a review playlist and the video playlist to go with the stories I typed out that highlight very important parts of the stories that have to do with your survival when you're out there in the field because you've been driven from your home due to a foreign invasion. But it could also likewise apply to an internal conflict because people get driven from their areas during any type of conflict. Doesn't matter if it's a civil or a foreign invasion or what, but people get driven from their homes all the time. You need to know how you're going to survive out in the wilderness. And I have a resource of videos on this channel. A whole resource library. The community tab story review highlights a lot of the stuff that was in the stories that people should really pay attention to. But the two documentaries about the invasion, you know, I mean, I'm like low budget history channel here. This is like low budget documentary channel, like history channel. I mean, like, I mean, it's like all my documentaries are very low budget, but I did the best with what I had. You know, I did the best as a presenter of that information, trying to present the information. I did my best. You know, it's hard to multitask like that. I have to read scenario scripts that I wrote for the scenarios, for the hypotheticals. I have to read those, hold the camera, and show on the map what's going on. It's very hard to multitask like that, to do three different things. But I made it work. Same thing with the community tabs. I had to purposely misspell a whole bunch of words in my stories and abbreviate things and do a whole bunch of BS nonsense just so the algos wouldn't take down my stories that I put all this time into writing. Even in my audiobook, there's a certain word I have to say wrong on purpose. It has to do with an ethnic group in Xinjiang in China, a certain one that's oppressed. I have to say that wrong on purpose because I don't want my audiobooks that I put all this time into getting taken down. It's lunacy that I even have to do any of that, but I have to keep my work up for people. So the internal conflict documentary is another great one. In fact, that's one of my most favorite ones I've done because now I don't even mind listening to it. Like I've said before, I don't even mind listening to it over and over because I really enjoyed how that was put together because I combined the stories. See, I couldn't do that with my other work because I wasn't doing live streaming at the time. But now that I could do live streaming, I could combine a bunch of different things into one presentation. Storytelling mixed with battle maps, mixed with economic stuff, mixed with atrocities, mixed with a leadership, all of those different things, mixed with the foreign intervention that took place in it, like them selling weapons to further destabilize the country. I mean, I threw a whole bunch of different things in that into one presentation. So I enjoyed that one. But the other ones are excellent too, but they don't have the combo of all those different things. It's just the battle maps in the docu-series for the invasion, and it's just the storytelling in the community tab story, but the internal conflict blended both aspects into one. But anyway, I got off on a tangent. But people should be thinking about their preparations and take it seriously. What are you investing your time into? Are you learning about how you're going to have to survive out in the wilderness? Are you learning how to cache away your items? Are you learning how to do field sanitation? Are you learning how to, do basic small unit level type of tactics? You're going to need to know a lot of that stuff. You're going to need to know a lot of it, whatever you can retain of it. You're going to need to practice it. You're going to need to learn it. You're going to need to learn about a lot of different things. Are you taking the time to learn practical things, or are you wasting time on MSM-oriented current events? What's going on here? What's the score? What is the score? By that I mean, what's everybody doing? What is everybody thinking? Like what's the deal with them? In other words, what's everybody doing? I mean, is everybody investing their time wisely, or are they pissing it away? Think very carefully, because we're running out of time. As a land, as a people, we're running out of time. And I'm very serious about that. How much time we have left, I don't know. But we're running out. You better use the remaining time wisely. That's all I can say. So I'm going to greet everybody in the chat before I get going. This was a good live. I enjoyed it. Hopefully the algos will kick it out. Hopefully people will hit that free like button that costs nothing. It costs nothing to hit the like button. It's free. Help me kick this out to people, because people need to hear these things. All right. Let's see what everybody's saying here. All right, Grandma Deb, great to see you. Klaus. Willkommen, Klaus. And P4 Plenty. Hey, what's up, buddy? Lady M, and great to see you. Yeah, I don't know, P4 Plenty. Those people are lost. I think a lot of them are going to be, like, falling out, if you know what I mean. Some of them could transform into something grotesque. Who knows? I mean, it's too early, I mean, we're only like a year and some months into this whole thing, that from when most people partook in it. So, there's no telling what they'll transform into in the more moderate term. But I know a lot of them are going to fall out. And unfortunately, a lot of our armed forces partook in that, so a lot of them are probably going to be wiped out from it too. They're not going to be effective in fighting whatsoever at all. Plus, they're woke tards and all this other stuff. Let's see. Hey, Brogan. Always happy to see you. Oops. What did I push? Oh, okay, sorry. Hit a button. I didn't know what it did. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. And yeah, it'll happen. Yeah, Klaus, I'm sure it'll happen before 2024. I don't even think we're going to make it to 2024, but that's just what I feel, Bang Bang and Mary and Kathy and Quit It With The Lies. Like I said, I like that name. That's a great name. BD and everybody. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Wild Animus, of course. Can't forget you. Thank you for coming. Y'all have a blessed night.